My brother Marcus has always had terrible taste in women. Not bad people, not cruel people, just wrong for him. The kind of wrong that anyone standing 2 feet outside the situation can see immediately. The kind of wrong that makes your mother set down her fork at dinner and stare at the ceiling for a moment before she speaks. So when he called me in October and said he had met someone, I did not get excited. I said, "That's great, Marcus." He said, "No, Danny, I mean it. She's different." I said, "I know, Marcus. She's always different." He said her name is Vera. That was the first time I heard her name. Vera. I remember thinking it was a pretty name, old-fashioned. The kind of name that belongs to a woman in a black and white photograph or a novel set somewhere cold and Eastern European. I did not think anything more about it than that. My name is Danny, short for Danielle. I am 29 years old. I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I work as a librarian, which I mention only because it matters later. Marcus is 32. 3 years older than me. He lives 40 minutes away in a smaller town called Black Mountain. He is a carpenter. He builds furniture by hand. He is the kind of person who is entirely too gentle for the world he inhabits. The kind of person who brings injured birds to the vet and names houseplants and cries at the end of old movies he has seen a dozen times. He is, in other words, my favorite person on earth. He called me twice that first week to talk about Vera. She was something, he said. He could not explain what. She was just something. I asked where they had met. At the farmer's market, he said. She had a stall. What did she sell? He paused for longer than seemed necessary. Herbs, he said, and other things. What kind of other things? He said he was not entirely sure. Little jars, little bundles, little paper bags that smelled interesting. I asked if she was a candle person. He said, "Not exactly." I let it go. I met her in November. Marcus had been talking about her for 6 weeks at that point. Vera this, Vera that. The way she laughed, the way she cooked, the way she knew things. He said that last part carefully, like he was testing whether to say more. She knows things, Danny. What kind of things? Just things, he said. We met at his house in Black Mountain for dinner on a Saturday evening. I brought wine. I was ready to be polite and reserved and gently skeptical in the way that older sisters are when younger brothers have been hurt before. She was already there when I arrived, standing in Marcus's kitchen, wearing a dark red sweater, long dark hair pulled back. She was maybe 35, maybe older. It was genuinely difficult to tell. She looked up when I walked in. She smiled. And I felt something I cannot explain. Something that settled over me like a change in air pressure. Not fear, not discomfort, more like attention. Like the room itself had turned slightly and was paying attention to something. "You must be Danny," she said. "I am," I said. "He talks about you constantly," she said. "You're the one who knows where every book lives." I work in a library. That is accurate, but it was the way she said it. Not impressed, not making small talk, like she was simply confirming information she already had. Dinner was good. The food was extraordinary, actually. Something with mushrooms and herbs that I could not identify. Not in the way of exotic ingredients, in the way of something that tasted exactly right, like it had been made specifically for me. Which I know is a strange thing to say about food, but that was how it tasted. She was warm, funny in a quiet way. She asked questions and listened to the answers. She and Marcus moved around each other in his kitchen with an ease that takes most couples years to develop. I liked her. I also noticed 3 things during that dinner that I filed away and did not examine until later. The first was the kitchen windowsill, lined with small glass jars, dried things inside, bundled herbs hanging above the window, a few candles burned down to stubs, a small clay dish with something dark and powdery in it. Marcus's kitchen had never looked like that before. The second was the cat. Marcus did not have a cat, except there was a cat. Black, very still, sitting on top of the refrigerator, watching the dinner with what I can only describe as professional interest. I asked whose cat that was. Vera said his name was Absalom. I asked where he had come from. He came with the arrangement, she said simply. I did not know what that meant. I did not ask. The third thing. Near the end of dinner, I mentioned that I had been having trouble sleeping. Just offhand, just the kind of thing you mention. Vera looked at me for a moment, not studying me, not making a show of it, just a glance. When we were leaving, she pressed a small cloth bag into my hand. It was tied with a dark cord. It smelled like something I could not name. Cedar, maybe. Something else. Put this under your pillow, she said. Just try it. I slept better that night than I had in 3 years. I did not think about the bag at first. People give you things. Lavender sachets, herbal things. It seemed explainable. I focused instead on my overall impression of Vera, which was, I liked her. She was unusual. She was right for Marcus in a way I had not expected. When I called him the next morning, he asked what I thought. I told him she was remarkable. He said, I know. He said it with such certainty that it stopped me. I asked what he meant by that. She's just remarkable, he said. She always knows what to say. She always knows what people need. She knew about your sleep thing before you mentioned it. She said she could tell when she met you. She said she could tell. I filed that away too. The next thing happened in December. I was visiting the county records archive at the library, not for any particular reason. We had received a collection of donated historical materials from an estate, and I was cataloging them. Letters, photographs, old local newspaper clippings going back to the 1880s. I am, as Vera had said, the person who knows where every book lives. But I am also the person who, when given a box of old things, will sit with them longer than necessary. Who reads the old letters, who looks at the faces in the photographs. One of the clippings stopped me, from a local paper, 1923. A brief article about a woman in the county who had been reported to authorities by her neighbors. The language was the language of 100 years ago. Eccentric, peculiar practices, claims made by residents on her road, animals behaving strangely, herbs in unusual arrangements, unexplained recoveries of illness among those who accepted her preparations. A healer, the article said, in the old sense of the word. The article included a photograph. I looked at it for a long time. The woman in the photograph was not Vera. Of course, she was not Vera. The photograph was 100 years old. But the woman in the photograph had the same dark hair, the same stillness, the same quality of simply being present in a way that most people are not. And her name was given in the article. Vera. I sat with that for a moment. Common name, I told myself. 100 years ago, it was very common. There was no reason to think anything of it. I photographed the clipping with my phone. I did not tell Marcus. Not yet. Christmas was at my parents' house in Hendersonville. Vera came. My mother, who is famously hard to impress, took to her immediately, which was unusual enough to notice. My mother kept finding reasons to stand near her, to talk to her. At one point, I watched my mother lean close and say something quiet to Vera, and watched Vera listen and then say something in return, and watched something in my mother's face settle, like a question she had been carrying for a long time had just been answered quietly and without ceremony. I asked my mother afterward what they had talked about. She shrugged. She said Vera had said something kind. She could not quite remember exactly what. I asked what she meant she could not remember. She said it was one of those things where you hear it and it goes somewhere deep, and that is where it stays. She did not know how to explain it better than that. That evening, helping Marcus clear dishes, I said very casually, "What exactly is Vera's background?" He glanced at me, the kind of glance that people give when they have been waiting for a question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, where is she from? What did she study? What does she actually sell at that market stall?" He set down the dishes. "She's from here," he said. "Always has been. Her family's been in this part of the mountains a long time." "How long?" He looked at me for a moment. "A long time, Danny." I showed him the photograph from the clipping. He looked at it without expression. He said, "That could be anyone." I said, "It says her name is Vera." He said, "It was a common name." I said, "Marcus?" He said, "I know." I said, "You know?" He said, "I know she's not like other people. I've known since almost the beginning." "And?" He looked at me with a steadiness that I had never quite seen in him before. Marcus, who cried at the ends of movies. Marcus, who brought injured birds to the vet. He said, "She is the best thing that has happened to me, whatever she is." Whatever she is. In January, I started paying different attention. Not suspicious attention, not frightened attention, but the attention that a librarian pays to things that do not quite fit the catalogue they are being filed under. Small things. Vera never used a phone that I ever saw. She communicated through Marcus when communication was needed. When I asked him once how she managed without one, he said she generally just knew when things were going to happen before they needed to be communicated. Vera's apartment in Black Mountain, which I visited once, was above an old hardware store that had been converted. She had been renting it, according to the landlord Marcus mentioned, for a very long time. I asked how long. Marcus said the landlord had told him she had been a tenant longer than he had owned the building. He had inherited her as a tenant, along with the building. The lease predated him. The previous owner had not left records going back far enough to show the original lease date. Vera knew things about people she should not have been able to know. Not facts, not information. The kind of things underneath facts and information. The thing a person needed. The thing a person was carrying. She knew it the way some people know when rain is coming. Not dramatically, just as a matter of course. The cat, Absalom, never seemed to need food. Marcus had noticed this. He had raised it with Vera. She had said, "He eats in other ways," and Marcus had accepted this. In February, I went back to the archive. Not on purpose, but I was there for something else, and I found myself at the older materials, the ones from the 1800s. I am a librarian. I know how to find things. I was there for 40 minutes before I found the first one. Another clipping, 1887. A woman in the county known for her herbal practice, known for healing, known for knowing things. A woman who had been in the mountains, according to neighbors, for as long as anyone could remember. No photograph, but a name. Vera. I sat alone in the archive for a long time. I did not tell Marcus that time. I went home. I sat with it. I thought about what I knew and what I thought I knew. I thought about the sleep sachet under my pillow that had worked on the first night and had kept working every night since. I thought about the food at that first dinner that tasted like it had been made specifically for me. I thought about whatever she had said to my mother that had settled something that had been unsettled. I thought about the cat who ate in other ways. I thought, what is she? And then I thought, does it matter? Because here is the thing. Here is the thing I kept coming back to. Every version of Vera I had found in those archives, across 130 years of mountains and small towns and people who needed things and did not know where to turn, she had been there, helping. Not dramatically, not in ways that drew attention, just quietly, consistently, in the manner of someone who had been doing this long enough to know that the helping was the only point. Marcus was happy in a way he had not been in years. My mother had had something settled in her that I did not know had been unsettled. I slept now. I thought, what exactly is my concern? I went to see Vera in March, alone, without telling Marcus. I went to the apartment above the old hardware store, climbed the narrow stairs, knocked. She opened the door. She looked at me. She did not look surprised. Of course she did not look surprised. "You found the records," she said. "Yes," I said. She stepped back and let me in. The apartment was full of light, shelves of things, jars and bundles and books, old books, very old books. The cat Absalom was sitting on a windowsill, watching the street. She made tea. We sat at a small table by the window. I did not know how to begin, so I said, "How long?" She thought about it, the way people think about a question they have considered many times, but which still deserves consideration each time. "Long enough," she said, "that I have stopped counting in the way that you would." I asked what she was. She wrapped her hands around her teacup and looked out the window at the mountains for a moment. I am what people in this part of the country have always called a certain kind of woman, she said. What that word means to you probably depends on what you have been taught. To me, it means someone who knows the land, someone who keeps the old ways, someone who carries certain things forward because they would be lost otherwise. She looked at me. Someone who helps, she said simply. I asked, "Are you going to hurt my brother?" She looked at me steadily. "No," she said. I said, "He's going to age." She said, "I know." I said, "And you won't." She was quiet for a moment. "I have watched that happen before," she said. "It is the hardest part of this particular life. I will not pretend otherwise. But I will not lie to him. He knows what I am. He knows what the years will look like. He has decided that what we have is worth what it costs." She looked at me with the kind of steadiness that comes from having waited out things I could not imagine waiting out. "Is it not his decision?" she said. I sat with that. I drank my tea. It tasted like something I needed without knowing I needed it. Something settling, the way things settle when Vera was near. I looked at the cat Absalom, who looked back at me with complete indifference. I looked at the old books on the shelves, at the jars of dried things, at the light coming in over the mountains outside. I asked, "The sachet you gave me, the one for sleeping?" She nodded. "What's in it?" She smiled for the first time since I had arrived, a real smile. "Things from the mountain," she said. "Some of them have names in Latin. Some of them have names that are older than Latin. The combination is the knowledge. That is what gets carried forward." She paused. "You can keep it as long as you need it," she said. I said, "I'm a librarian. I believe in knowing what things are. I believe in having names for things." She said, "I know." I said, "And I don't have a name for you. Not one that fits, exactly." She considered that. "Most of the women in your archive did not have a name that fit exactly either," she said. "They were just themselves, doing what they knew how to do, in the place they had always been." She looked out at the mountains again. "The mountains have names," she said, "but the mountains were here before anyone named them." I went home. I called Marcus. I said, "I went to see Vera." He said, "I know. She told me you might." I said, "She said you know what she is." He said, "I know enough." I said, "Are you sure about this?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the uncertain quiet of someone deciding, the settled quiet of someone who has already decided and is simply letting the question finish. He said, "She makes the world make sense in a way it didn't before. She's been here longer than I can understand, and she chose this mountain, and she chose that market stall, and she chose me. Whatever that means, and whatever it costs, yeah, I'm sure." I thought about a woman in 1887 in these same mountains, helping people who needed help, with no name that fit exactly. I thought about her 100 years later, still here, still at the market, with her jars and her bundles, and her quiet knowledge of what people needed before they knew they needed it. I thought about the way Marcus had said, "She is just remarkable," with that steadiness I had never seen in him before. I said, "Okay." He said, "Okay?" I said, "Yes, okay." That was 8 months ago. Marcus is happier than I have ever seen him. Vera comes to family dinners. She brings things in small jars that my mother has quietly integrated into her kitchen without comment. Absalom the cat has started appearing at my apartment occasionally, which I did not invite, but have not discouraged. He sits on my windowsill and watches things in a way that is either ordinary cat behavior or something else, and I have decided it does not matter which. I still have the sleep sachet under my pillow. I went back to the archive once more, last month. I found a reference going back further than I expected. A woman, mountains, herbs, knowing. I sat with that document for a long time. Then I filed it carefully in the catalogue under Local Figures, Historical Women, where it will be accessible to anyone who goes looking. Because that is what librarians do. We make things findable. We keep things from being lost. Vera would understand that. I saw her last Sunday. We walked in the hills above Black Mountain, the three of us. The trees coming into early spring, the light going long and gold in the late afternoon. She walked with Marcus, with her hand in his, and she moved through that landscape the way water moves through its own country, like she knew every stone, like she had walked this exact ground 1,000 times in every season, which she probably had. At one point, she stopped on the path and looked at something I could not see. A bird, I thought at first, but she stood very still, and her eyes were tracking something that wasn't there for me to see. Then she glanced at me. She said quietly, "There's a hawk nest up in the ridge. Has been for a long time." I said, "How long?" She smiled. "Long enough," she said. We walked home in the last of the light. The mountains held the dark the way they always have, the way they will long after all of us have passed through. Except maybe Vera. I have stopped trying to find the exact right word for what she is. She is what she is. She has been what she is for a long time. She helps. She knows things. She carries forward what would otherwise be lost. She chose my brother, who is too gentle for the world, and she is going to spend whatever years they have together making the world make sense for him. I think there is a word for someone like that. I just think the word is not the one that first comes to mind. I think the word might simply be good. Good night.